I reject your evidence and instead look to the evidence in the messages written at the time when considering your motives. There is insufficient evidence to find that you, Eddie, were personally motivated by any sadistic desires. There is some evidence that you were upset after the killing, but you knew Scarlett enjoyed the thought of causing pain and fear. In some messaging, you even encouraged that, such as suggesting she could derive pleasure from watching someone die by hanging. You did not know Brianna. You knew only what Scarlett told you. She said Brianna was transgender and sent you pictures of her. Your messages about Brianna were transphobic. You consistently referred to her in a way that was dehumanising, calling her it. You also described her as a femboy thing. When discussing killing Brianna, you agreed with Scarlett that she would be the easiest victim and said, "And I want to see if it will scream like a man or a girl." After the failed attempt on the 28th of January, and in answer to Scarlett expressing her desire to see Brianna suffering, you said, really all I wanted is to see what size dick it had. Because Scarlett is an unreliable witness, I will not use her evidence that you had a problem with gay and transgender people against you, nor will I dwell on the unpleasant messages about someone being gay and what you might do to them. But in your messages about Brianna, you undoubtedly displayed hostility towards her based on her transgender identity. Your explanation is that you were just copying language used by friends, including Scarlett, to fit in. Throughout the messaging, Scarlett almost always referred to Brianna as a girl and used the pronouns she and her, so you were not following Scarlett's lead. It may be that you picked up some of this language and the hostile views at school, but after considering all the evidence I have about you, I am satisfied that you are quite capable of holding your own views. I have now seen a great deal of expert evidence about you. For the record, I will upload to the digital case system a list of all the material I have considered. At an earlier stage in the proceedings, I had the advantage of hearing some evidence from Dr. Crawford, the psychiatrist at your unit, and from Dr. Bowers, a psychologist. I have also carefully considered the written evidence of Dr. Diggle. I have paid close attention to your presentation during the trial. You were helped to give evidence in an unusual way by typing your answers, because it was agreed you are selectively mute, not by choice. You coped well with giving evidence and were able to get across what you wanted to, including under cross-examination. Since you have been in custody, you have been diagnosed as having an autistic spectrum disorder, at the mild end of the spectrum. You showed signs of autism from a young age, but you were able to attend mainstream school where you did well and were not considered vulnerable there. You had some friends, you had strengths and weaknesses, you liked to be seen as intelligent and had a real interest in science, but you were socially awkward. Your mutism is apparently a reaction to the situation you now find yourself in and the severe anxiety that has followed. At the time of the killing, you were living at home and well integrated at school. Looking at all the evidence, the expert reports, as well as the evidence at trial, I am satisfied that your diagnosis does not explain the way you referred to Brianna, although it does have some impact for sentencing. Using the table in Schedule 21 for young offenders, the starting point for those aged 15 or 16 at the date of offence is 20 years if the case falls into the category for which the adult starting point is 30 years. It is 17 years if the adult starting point would be 25 years. It is agreed by everyone that those are the two categories to consider. Paragraph 3 of the schedule explains that a case will fall in the higher category if the seriousness of the offence is particularly high. It gives examples of cases that will normally be included in that category. It does not say that they are the only examples of offences of particularly high seriousness, but this is a good guide to judges. 2 examples are relevant here. They are a murder involving sadistic conduct and a murder that is aggravated by hostility related to transgender identity. If I do not treat you as falling into paragraph 3, then the 17-year starting point applies because the murder involved a knife being taken to the scene. That was part of the joint plan and so applies equally to Scarlett as it does to Eddie, whose knife it was. The starting point I use is just that. It is not the end point. I then have to weigh up all the things that make your offending worse, what we call aggravating factors, and all those that count in your favour, mitigating factors. Sadistic motives are not themselves enough to bring the case within paragraph 3. The test is sadistic conduct. Equally, the fact that there is some evidence of transphobia does not lead automatically to the higher starting point. Here it is agreed that the question is whether the murder was, at least in part, motivated by hostility to Brianna because she was transgender. My conclusions on these issues are important, but they are not decisive because in the end I am required to decide whether the offence is one of particularly high seriousness and then to put everything else into the balance to reach the end point, which is what you will be most interested in. Scarlett, I have concluded that the primary motivation for Brianna's murder was your deep desire to kill. The messages reveal your fantasies and show your sadistic motives. Brianna's murder was exceptionally brutal. Your actions after the event and what you have told Dr. Church confirm you enjoyed the killing. Taking all that evidence together, this was a murder involving sadistic conduct. Eddie, although your motives may not have been the same, you knew what Scarlett wanted to do and why. You understood her desire to see Brianna suffer. You actively participated in this brutal murder, knowing the sadistic motives behind it, and you cannot avoid the consequences just by saying you did not have the same desires. I find also that you, Eddie, were motivated in part by hostility towards Brianna because she was transgender. You dehumanised Brianna by constantly referring to her as it, and your messages about wanting to see if she would scream like a man or a girl and really wanting to see what size dick it had, along with checking the night before the killing that Brianna was coming, show your own interests in killing Brianna linked to your hostility towards her as a transgender person. Just as you knew of Scarlett's motives, she knew of yours. Although I cannot go so far as to say she used your transphobic attitudes to get you involved. I therefore find that you both took part in a brutal and planned murder which was sadistic in nature and where a secondary motive was hostility towards Brianna because of her transgender identity. In any event, however it is analysed, I think it is plain that this was a murder of particularly high seriousness and that the part each of you played leads to the starting point of 20 years. Had I not reached that conclusion, I would have treated the sadistic motives and transphobic comments as significant aggravating features at the next stage. As it is, I will be careful not to double count things that have already gone into the starting point. There are many serious features in this case, but they overlap, and it would be wrong to treat each one as separately uplifting the minimum term. I also keep firmly in mind that you are very young, and you must be sentenced with the hope, if not the immediate expectation, that you can one day be rehabilitated, however cruel that may seem to those who have lost a loved one. Looking at aggravating factors, Brianna's murder involved a significant degree of planning and premeditation, with more general plans to kill other people. The planning started with you, Scarlett, and it was you who brought Eddie in. But Eddie, you joined in with the planning. I do bear in mind that apart from the awful subject matter, the plans were in some ways quite childish. Scarlett's notebooks were left where they could easily be found. But the extent of the planning, on any view, remains a significant aggravating factor for each of you. In your case, Scarlett, I have to bear in mind that you tried to kill Brianna by poisoning her. Although that does not apply to you, Eddie, you did encourage further attempts at poisoning, although that did not happen. Both of you were involved in the failed attempt to kill Brianna on the 28th of January and persisted when that did not come off. Brianna was vulnerable, as described by her family, even if not strictly to be treated as vulnerability in the statutory sense. You picked Brianna because you both thought she would be an easy target. In doing so, you, Scarlett, abused her trust. She thought you were her friend. You encouraged her not to be anxious and guided her through getting the bus. Eddie, you knew Scarlett was preying on Brianna in this way, and so it aggravates your offending too, although perhaps to a lesser degree than Scarlett's. I recognise these features are part of the planning I have described, and I avoid double counting, but they are still matters to put in the balance. I have taken account of the brutality of the killing and the use of the knife when assessing the starting point. I have also built in the sadistic motive and transphobic hostility. All these things are very serious features, but I have explained how they are linked, and so they do not each call for separate additional uplifts. They do, though, have to be recognised in balancing the aggravating and mitigating features. Taken together, they illustrate how serious this offence was, even in the context of other murders falling into the category I have identified. The attempts to conceal evidence were not sophisticated and do not have any significant impact. Brianna's body was not concealed, probably because you were disturbed. I will not speculate as to what might have happened if you had not been. It is an aggravating feature that you committed the murder in broad daylight in a park when there were other people around, including a family playing hide and seek and lots of dog walkers. It was always likely that other people would come upon the scene and suffer trauma, as happened. In considering mitigation, I have considered everything I have read about you, including the pre-sentence reports. I bear in mind your previous good character, although this must be viewed in the context of very serious offending and the contents of the messages. Within the 15 to 16 age range, there will be differing levels of maturity. I must look at your maturity while also thinking about any mental or developmental disorders which may have lowered your culpability, looking at the various reports on you both. Scarlett, the assessment of your intellectual ability fits with other evidence that you are not mature or clever. You have some vulnerabilities. Since you were about 14, you have had problems with your mood, anxiety, self-harming and anorexia. Reports prepared before the trial suggested you had traits of autism and ADHD. Dr. Church no longer thinks that applies. You have changed your account since the trial. You have admitted taking part in Brianna's murder. You have said things about what you did and how you felt, both to Dr. Church and to others, including Miss Howarth, who wrote the pre-sentence report. You have lied so many times, Scarlett, that it is impossible to know what is true and what is not. There are, though, worrying things in the recent reports. You have expressed the desire to kill again. If those thoughts continue, you will not be released. Dr. Church's latest report will need to be retained on your file. It contains important information the parole board would need to consider. You have shown no remorse, Having now assessed you several times, Dr. Church has diagnosed that you have a severe form of conduct dissocial disorder, one of the features of which is having no empathy. Your lack of empathy does provide some explanation for how you could commit such a dreadful murder, but in my view, it does not significantly lower your culpability. There is no suggestion that you did not know that what you were doing was wrong or that you were unable to control your actions. You were able to plan in an organised way and had full awareness that it was criminal behaviour. In short, your diagnosed disorder did not drive your actions, although it meant you did not have the mental break that most people have to stop them wanting to harm others because that feels wrong. It may not have felt wrong, but there is no doubt you knew it was wrong to act as you did, and you chose to do so anyway. I take account of the diagnosis, but in my view, it offers limited mitigation. There are no other relevant diagnoses in your case, but there are some concerns about your mental health and how you will respond after today, which those responsible for your care will no doubt note. Scarlett, it is clear that if you are ever to be released, a huge amount of work will need to be done with you first. But the hope remains that this can happen, and you should work hard on your rehabilitation. Eddie, you have been described as extremely vulnerable. There are areas in which your functioning is like that of a much younger child. Your social skills are certainly not as developed as most people of your age. I have looked carefully at the limitations outlined by Dr. Diggle, but it is hard to view these limitations as significantly lowering your culpability for Brianna's murder. I should also say that my analysis of your offending differs in some important respects from that contained in the pre-sentence report. Ms. Howarth has attempted to make sense of what you have told her, but you have not given a truthful account. I have found her report helpful, though, reading it in the context of my factual findings. I bear in mind that it is difficult for a proper assessment to be made as to the impact of your ASD while you continue to deny what you did. But I am confident from all I have seen that you knew very well that what you were doing was terribly wrong, and that you were capable of saying no to Scarlett. Your autism cannot provide any real excuse for the offence. I do, though, recognise that some downwards adjustment is required in balancing against the aggravating factors to reflect that you are less mature than many others within the 15 to 16 age category, and that your thinking skills are less developed in several areas. More generally, your ASD, severe anxiety and selective mutism has made your experience of custody more difficult. Despite this, Dr. Crawford's latest report shows reasonable progress. You have managed to pass your GCSEs while in custody and to begin studying A-levels, and you have agreed to start speech and language therapy. Although you showed no remorse at trial, or indeed today, the pre-sentence report showed some insight into Brianna's family's feelings. You told Miss Howarth, "I wouldn't think that there is anything to say because I'm certain that there is nothing either of us could say that would ever help them with their situation and would more than likely cause more pain." This is, in fact, quite a mature statement and one that may be built upon. I also find that it is consistent with my view that despite the limitations identified in the expert evidence, you are capable of thinking about the consequences of your actions. Taking the evidence as a whole, I find that the impact of your ASD on your culpability is limited. I do not doubt that transferring to prison when you are an adult will be difficult. Prison is more difficult for those who are neurodiverse. Your behaviour in custody has been good so far, and it is clear from the pre-sentence report that there is a hope that you may one day be rehabilitated. You must continue to work towards that. I have weighed all the aggravating and mitigating factors that apply to each of you. Although I have taken the same starting point, I have concluded that the final minimum terms must be different. In Scarlett's case, the aggravating features are significant and would have led to a substantial uplift to the starting point, but for the mitigation, particularly that relating to maturity and mental disorder. There must still be an uplift, but it will be moderated. In Eddie's case, I find that the balance to be struck between aggravating factors, which are not quite as high as in Scarlett's case, and the mitigation I have identified is such as to cancel each other out. In saying that, I have taken account of all the medical evidence and accept the diagnosis of ASD has some impact, but the extent to which it reduced your culpability in the circumstances of this offending is limited. This was undoubtedly a very serious offence with multiple aggravating factors. That is the context in which I impose minimum terms which are lengthy for offenders of your age, albeit significantly less than an equivalent sentence for an adult. The parole board will have to decide if and when either or both of you can be released. That will only happen if you no longer pose a danger. If you are released, you will remain on licence for life and you may be recalled to prison. I will now sentence each of you. You may remain seated. In both cases, the relevant statutory surcharge will apply. Scarlett Jenkinson, for the murder of Brianna Jai, you will be detained at His Majesty's pleasure. I set the minimum term at 22 years, less the 352 days that you have spent on remand. Eddie Radcliffe, for the murder of Brianna Jai, you will be detained at His Majesty's pleasure. I set the minimum term at 20 years, less the 352 days that you have spent on remand. Please take the defendants to the cells and their legal teams will come and see them before they go to begin their sentences. Thank you.
Okay, that was the sentencing of Brianna Jai's murderers, Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe. If you're just joining us, Mrs Justice Yip at Manchester Crown Court passed judgment. Scarlett Jenkinson, life with a minimum term of 22 years, less 352 days spent in remand. Eddie Ratcliffe, 20 years minimum, less those 352 days. She did say there is hope they can both be rehabilitated in time, called this a murder of significant conduct. Lots of harrowing detail to go through in that. I'm joined also in the studio now by the former Metropolitan Police Detective, Peter Blexley. Peter, we sat and listened to a huge amount of very grisly and disturbing detail, clearly premeditated, particularly of Scarlett. You have lied so many times, it's impossible to even know what's true, and expressed concern that Scarlett wanted to kill again and has shown no remorse. Likewise, with Eddie, shown no remorse at trial or indeed today. Sent down. Peter Blexley, what's your take on their sentence?
Brianna's family have had to suffer the horror of sitting through the trial and then to listen to the words of Mrs Justice Yip, which are so astonishing, are so brutal, are so vile, including Scarlett expressing a desire to perhaps kill again, and to collect body parts, including possibly an eye, which was her intention, and would have been carried out probably had they not been disturbed on that dreadful, fateful, murderous day. My thoughts go out to everyone who knew and loved Brianna, and I think Mrs Justice Yip, in her calm and measured way, family has handed down sentences that are appropriate, 22 years and 20 years respectively, but they will, of course, only ever be released if there is a huge amount of rehabilitation work done in the next 2 decades.
And Peter, the details once again started off at the beginning, Mrs. Justice Yip, by saying no one will ever know what Brianna was capable of. The parents' loss is imaginable. Went on to detail 28 deep stab wounds to the head, the neck and the back. Defensive injuries showed that Brianna tried to defend herself. A sustained and very violent assault, a joint plan you carried out together, and particularly damning of Scarlett. You blur the lines between fantasy and real life.
And of course, both defendants lied and lied and lied again, almost to the point where it is indecipherable whether either of them were telling the truth or not. Now, Mrs. Justice Yip has had to abide by sentencing guidelines and sentence them according to their age when they committed the crime. They were both 15. And there are guidelines for 15 to 16-year-olds specifically for this type of offence. And these sentences sit at the very top of what could be handed down by the judge. In other words, 20 years for the most serious of crimes, because there were so many aggravating factors, and Scarlett has another 2 years, taking her to 22, because the aggravating factors were numerous and appalling.
And Peter, Mrs. Justice Yip was very, very detailed and methodical about any potential mitigating circumstances. Scarlett said that she was not mature for her age, evidence of self-harming, of anorexia, an earlier diagnosis of autism and ADHD when she was younger, but said that wasn't sufficient to mitigate her sentence. Do you feel that that's fair? Justice has been done today?
Oh, undoubtedly. I think the judge has handed down as stern a sentence as she possibly could within the guidelines, and in order to prevent some future appeal. Although, of course, these two children, they remain children, and their legal teams will undoubtedly, I suspect, try and look at the sentencing to see if there is any possible way they can appeal. That, of course, would bring on more hurt, more upset for Brianna's family, and it is her family who will now serve the whole life term, because that sense of loss will simply never go away.
OK, Peter Bleksley, please stay with us, but I'm joined now, going over to GB News reporter Sophie Reaper, who's been outside Manchester Crown Court. Sophie, details coming out there. Justice has been passed. What's the latest?
Well, we've just come from inside the courtroom here in Manchester, where Justice Yip has delivered the sentence to Scarlett and Eddie, the murderers of transgender teenager Brianna Ghey. 22 years for Scarlett, 20 years for Eddie. When she delivered that sentencing, there was absolutely no reaction from either of the two. Throughout her discussion of what the sentencing would be and her explanation, Scarlett was nervously fidgeting with her hands. Eddie was bouncing his knees up and down throughout today. He's had a puzzle book on his knee with the word relax written at the top. Scarlett has been doodling in a book. But as Justice Yip delivered those sentences, there was no movement, there was no reaction whatsoever, outwardly anyway. Once Justice Yip had finished the sentencing, they were both taken from the courtroom, and that was it. It realistically, they gave no kind of reaction whatsoever for really quite lengthy minimum terms. Of course, we know that they were both, we'd already been warned that they would be given the life sentence, but what they've been sentenced to today is the minimum term that they must serve before they could be considered for release. Now, one of the key words that Justice Yip kept returning to as she spoke this afternoon was rehabilitation. Her hope that both Scarlett and Eddie could be rehabilitated throughout their time in prison. I think more aimed at Scarlett. She continued to say how much work Scarlett would have to do in order to be rehabilitated. Of course, we've heard over the trial and today that Scarlett has continuously showed interest in killing once again, her enjoyment in stabbing Brianna, and I'm sure it's that prompted Justice Yip to enforce just how much work would need to be done. When it came to Eddie, she talked about how he'd passed his GCSEs whilst in custody and will now go on to do A-levels. He's also agreed to speech and language therapy. She seemed almost more hopeful that Eddie would be able to be rehabilitated, but she did say for both of them that she was hoping that despite these lengthy minimum terms that they would be able to go through the justice system, that they are both still very young, both still only 16 years old, that by the time they reach that minimum sentence, they will have been rehabilitated and they can be assessed to see whether or not they're still a danger to society, and if not, there is a chance that they could be released from prison.
And Sophie, may I ask, were Brianna's parents present, and if so, was there any reaction from them?
Both Esther and Peter have been present throughout. They were here completely every day throughout the trial, and they've been here all day today, sat in the courtroom. They didn't really seem to have much reaction. I think we've seen their reactions, obviously, on the steps outside the court once they were found guilty, Scarlett and Eddie. Today, of course, an incredibly upsetting day for them. I spoke earlier about Brianna's father gave his witness impact statement in person, but her mother, Esther, was unable to do so. She was just too overcome with emotion. And unsurprisingly, really, of course, what an incredibly difficult day for both of them and their wider family.
Okay, thank you, Sophie Reefer, for that update. Sentencing of the killers Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe from Manchester Crown Court. And I can be joined now by former senior investigative officer at the Metropolitan Police, Simon Harding. Simon, being sent down 22 years minimum term for Jenkinson, 20 years for Eddie Ratcliffe. Some appalling details came out of a clearly premeditated and planned killing. Do you feel justice has been served today?
It's really difficult, isn't it? I mean, you know, whether I feel it or not, I mean, the family will never feel that justice has really been served. I mean, you know, these are the cases when people use phrases like, you know, lock them up and throw away the key, isn't it? So, you know, it's a difficult, because as Peter said earlier, that they're working within guidelines. But when you have people that have these kind of thoughts, you know, Jenkinson has these kind of thoughts, and is there a sentence enough, you know, that can justify what she's done? And, you know, I think it's going to be a very, very difficult sentence to come to terms with, just for the family alone.
Really astonishing was the level of premeditation, an obsession with serial killers, notebooks detailing Jeffrey Dahmer and the likes of that, their modus operandi, an obsession with the macabre, calculated double act together. They clearly worked to a plan. They had a kill list of others, classmates who are still traumatised by that. And the horrifying detail coming out from Mrs. Justice Yip there, Simon, of Scarlett in particular, her desire to collect body parts. She wanted to keep flesh or an eyeball, and even professed the desire to kill again.
Yeah, it's shocking to hear that. I mean, I draw sort of parallels to a case a few years ago with Daniel Hussein, who stabbed to death Nicole Smallman and Bieber Henry in London, and he was similar thoughts as well, killing people every 6 months, 6 people in 6 months, and the desire to kill at the time, and also talking about this Satanist thoughts as well. And of course, then when you start drawing parallels, you look at how, you know, why she had these thoughts in the first place, and where's she getting these thoughts from? You know, and before, in the case of Hussein, it was online, and these things were easily accessible. There was people giving out instructions on how to kill people, and, you know, how to be a Satanist and how to get rewards out of them. So, you know, this is going to open up a lot more to, you know, how did she get into this particular mindset that then led her to this, you know, horrific and brutal crime?
Simon, there's been a great deal of discussion, as ever, in these horrific cases of nature or nurture. The idea that the people can be radicalised by the dark web, by an obsession with other killers, that level of detail or obsession. Do you buy that could be the case, or do you think that some people are just born evil?
I think there's a bit of both, to be honest with you. I think I've met people that are just born evil, and then there are those that can get influenced, and when they are particularly vulnerable in their lives by what they see online. And that was the case in Daniel Hussein's case, and they need to identify in this part of rehabilitation, as they'll call it, and discovering how her mind really works, will discover whether or not she is one or the other, whether she is born evil, and it certainly sounds like that at the moment, or whether she has been influenced by what she's found online. But this, again, as I said, opens up the debate about opening up our youth to people online who can target the vulnerable and give them thoughts like this. So, yes, I think it could be both, but we'll wait and see what it's like for her.
And Simon, one of the really difficult things for people to process, alongside this premeditation, alongside this clear obsession with detail to a clear plan working together, was it almost detachment from reality. This took place, this attack, in broad daylight in a park, and Mrs. Justice Yip was reading out details that were just chilling. A family playing hide and seek in the background at the same time, multiple dog walkers in that park, and then the body left. Clearly, she said, because they'd been disturbed, and she said she didn't want to speculate what may have happened if they hadn't been disturbed. To do this in broad daylight in such cold blood is absolutely breathtakingly cruel.
Yeah, we don't really, as members of the public, see these kind of sentencing and these remarks and the detail that Justice Yip gave today. And, I've sat through them many times over the years and listened to, things that I know about, and it still shocks me again when I hear it again and again about the evidence that we had and what we discovered. And to hear that the things that they did, to poor Brianna, I think it's awful. And yes, I think she's quite right to suggest that, an extra time was given because of where it was done and when it was done in broad daylight in front of families, and yes, they probably would have gone on to try and conceal the body. She's quite right in saying that as well. It would have been fairly, part of their plan, I'm sure. But unfortunately, as she also said, is that we don't really know.
I'm afraid we have to move on now. We are expecting a press conference. We're now going to New Scotland Yard for an update on the manhunt for chemical attack suspect Abdul Azidi.
I'll try and shout. Is that all right? Clear enough? OK, thanks. I'm Commander John Saville. So, good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm here to give you an update in relation to our progress following the horrific incident in Clapham on Wednesday evening. First of all, an update on how our victims are. The mother remains very poorly in hospital and she's sedated at the moment. We expect that those injuries will be life-changing. Thankfully, we've had an update from the hospital that the two young children that were with her, their injuries aren't as serious as first thought, and they are not likely to be life-changing. They remain with Mum in the care of the NHS, and we of course wish them the very best recovery that we can. In terms of our manhunt for Azedi, we've got a large team of very experienced detectives leading the manhunt, using all the tactics that you would expect us to use, lots of officers out on the ground, and we are working very closely with colleagues from Transport for London, British Transport Police, and our colleagues in Northumbria Police as well. Last night, 5 search warrants were executed, 2 in East London and 3 up in Newcastle, and we've recovered some significant and important pieces of evidence which will help with our investigation. I'd like to give you a rundown of the timeline that we know so far in relation to what happened and the movements on Wednesday. So, we know that Azedi left Newcastle in the very, very early hours of Wednesday morning, and he travelled down south to London. But around about 6:30 a.m. he was in the Tooting area. There was a further sighting of his vehicle at about 4:30 p.m. in Croydon, and at about 7 p.m. he was in the Streatham area. As you know, the awful attack took place at 7:25 in the evening in Clapham, and at 33 minutes past 7 he boards a train at Clapham South Tube. We know that at 8 p.m. he was at King's Cross Tube Station, and then at about 8:45, you've seen the images, he was captured in Tesco's on the Caledonian Road, which are the images you've seen with a fairly significant facial injury. Thankfully, due to the great response we've had from the public, we're able to follow him and know that he got on a train at 9 p.m, a Victoria Line tube heading south, and we've got some further images from the CCTV that my colleagues will share with you shortly, and we would very much like all of the public's help in identifying where he's travelled. If you've seen Azedi, or you know where he is, then I urge you please to contact our hotline, which is 0207 175 2784, or of course you can phone Crime Stoppers. If you think you've seen Azedi now, do not approach him, ring 999 and we will be there urgently. We need the public's help to trace Azedi. It's really important. Finally, I can make a personal appeal to him, because Abdul, you clearly have got some very significant injuries. We've seen the images. You need some medical help. So do the right thing and hand yourself in. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, the media, for your help in getting us to find Azedi. Thank you.
Take any questions?
Okay, that was a press conference at New Scotland Yard. Commander John Saville giving us an update on Abdul Azedi, still at large, but a significant timeline of his movements. But the most important details at first there, the mother is still, quotes, very poorly, is sedated and will have life-changing injuries. The children, he said, luckily are not as poorly as initially thought, and they will not have life-changing injuries. So the mother clearly coming out much, much worse. Talking about a manhunt of a significant operation. 5 search warrants were issued. Significant evidence has been retrieved. He left Newcastle very early on Wednesday, and then a timeline built up of his movements. Croydon 4:30, 7:30 Clapham South Tube, King's Cross at 8. And they admitted he's gone off radar. We need the public's help, was the call at the end there. And he ended, he said, with a personal plea, and that being, Abdul, you need medical help. You are very badly injured. Do the right thing and hand yourself in. That's the latest on the manhunt for Abdul Azedi, still at large. Press announcement there from Scotland Yard. Okay, now we can cross to Ray Addison for an update, who's in the area. Ray, what's the latest?
Yes, hello Martin, good afternoon. Well, a very personal appeal there, as we've just heard from Commander John Saville on the steps of Scotland Yard. That update on the manhunt for 35-year-old Abdul Azedi, and of course a relief for many members of the public following this case very, very closely, to hear that the 2 young girls, those daughters involved in this case, the 8-year-old and the 3-year-old, are not in a serious condition as we had previously thought, and not left, we are told, in that statement with any life-changing injuries, and that will be particularly well heard following those horrific descriptions of the injuries that the mother had received, and then, of course, the attack that took place on the younger daughter. We heard from the witness saying how she had been lifted up like a pillow and then slammed into the ground, not once but twice, and the witness describing to us how it made that sickening sound as she was thrown onto the ground, not once but twice. Other details we've heard there: the mother does remain in hospital. She's sedated, and it is thought that she will have, as originally stated, life-changing injuries. Now, as they were saying, there's a large team now on this manhunt, not just in London, but of course the Northumbria police as well. Those 5 search warrants being executed.
I'm afraid we have to interrupt you now because you have to cross to Manchester. Okay, so the CPS are making a statement now in Manchester on the murder of Brianna Ghey.
Messages between the two provided a terrifying insight into the warped desires and fantasies of the 2 defendants. However, they also provided us with the motivation behind the attack, the plans and the attempts to cover it up. Crown Prosecution Service presented all the evidence in this case for the jury to consider, including the hateful and dehumanising language used to describe Brianna. We applied to the judge for an increase in the defendant's sentences because we believe this killing was a hate crime, motivated in part by hostility towards Brianna because she was transgender. We are pleased that the court has agreed that this was a motive. Today's sentence reflects the brutality of the 2 killers' heartless crime, and while it cannot erase the pain of Brianna's loss, we hope it brings some closure. The Crown Prosecution Service would again like to thank Brianna's family for the courage and dignity they have shown throughout the proceedings, and our thoughts and sympathies remain with them at this difficult time. Thank you.
Okay, so let's come back to the studio now. Lots to unpack there. I'm still joined by Peter Blexley. Peter, can we talk first about the manhunt for Abdul Azidi, the press conference there, Commander John Saville at New Scotland Yard. A significant manhunt underway.
Yes, I think Commander Saville told us a lot of what we might have expected of a manhunt where the fugitive is still at large, which of course he is. He talks about a number of experienced detectives. Yes, we would have expected that. We heard that search warrants have been executed, 5 executed overnight, and the movements of the car. Well, of course, that vehicle will have been tracked on automatic number plate recognition cameras, so they backtracked to when he started his journey down. Noticed that there were, I would imagine, premises that he probably visited, and consequently they've gathered some further evidence in relation to the attack, it would seem. But the crucial point is, once again, the police are pleading for the public's help. They don't know where he is right now, here and now, a dangerous man, not to be approached. And of course the commander made a personal appeal to Azedi to hand himself in. Now, whether that's going to be of any use or not, we shall have to wait and see. But I just reiterate, in case viewers and listeners haven't picked up on it, this man with this hugely significant and distinctive injury to the right-hand side of his face is not to be approached. If you see him, wheresoever that may be, please pick up the phone, dial 999.
And that was echoed by Commander Saville saying ring 999. Do you think this is emblematic of a force that don't have any leads? I mean, if they're appealing to the public like this, is that effectively saying we don't know where he is, where it's a total loss, or would there be something else going in the background we don't know about? What's your experience?
I wouldn't describe the police's situation, as I see it, as being at a total loss at the moment. We know they've searched 5 premises, 5 different search warrants executed. That's taken up some resources. They've clearly got some intelligence as to where Azedi may have been. And of course, past behaviour is often a factor in future behaviour. So I would have expected them to visit addresses that he may possibly have visited in the very recent past. But as for the here and now, as for his current location, Clearly, the Metropolitan Police don't know where that is. Significant, perhaps, that as Eddie travelled on the Victoria line, which would take him in a sort of southwesterly direction from North London. Anybody living on a tube station on that line, please be aware, please be somewhat cautious as you go about your business. And if you see him, once again, just pick up that phone straight away.
It seems astonishing, Peter, in this day and age, when there are CCTV cameras everywhere, on every carriage in the London Underground. If a guy with, and they did say they are releasing fresh pictures of him, they must have pictures, a guy with that degree of facial disfiguration, and they know what he was wearing, he would have been very easily captured by CCTV imagery on the Underground.
Yes, but as so often is the case with somebody on the run, how successful they can be or otherwise at evading capture depends on whether they've got any network supporting them. If he's on his own and he's literally been cut loose because nobody wants to help him, then he's got a real challenge on his hands, because he's going to need change of clothing, somewhere to sleep, food, water, cash or access to funds. And if nobody is supplying him with that, he's going to be a desperate soul. If, of course, he's got a network that are helping him in the ways I've just mentioned, then that is going to make the police's job increasingly difficult.
Okay, Peter Blakeslee, thank you very much. And I think we can cross now, get back to our Manchester Crown Court after the killers of Brianna J were sentenced. Joining us now is GB News reporter Sophie Reaper. Sophie, we just heard a statement from the CPS. What's the latest?
Well, they essentially were recapping the case itself. They said it's perhaps one of the most disturbing they've ever seen. She said that Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe were a deadly influence on one another, and that they turned dark fantasies into reality. They also confirmed that they had applied for a harsher sentence for the two because they believe that the crime they committed was a hate crime. Of course, in the sentencing, we heard Justice Yip addressing the sadism showed by Scarlett Jenkinson and the transphobia shown by Eddie Ratcliffe. CPS acknowledged the fact that as a result of that, they did appeal to have longer sentences, and that was granted. Now, she also said that the sentence reflects the brutality of the murder. We know that Brianna J, after she was lured to Linear Park in Warrington, that she was stabbed 28 times with a hunting knife in the neck, back and chest. Justice Yip, in her sentencing, discussed those wounds, saying how deep some of them had gone. It was really rather gratuitous. But she finished her statement, the lady from CPS, Nicola Wynne Williams, she concluded by saying although she knew it couldn't erase the loss of Brianna, she hoped that it would bring some closure to the families. We have just seen Brianna's father, Peter Spooner, exiting the court. I'm sure that her mother, Esther, will be leaving shortly as well. Of course, a really quite horrific time for them, but I'm sure now they'll be going home today, hoping to feel some sort of closure. Of course, their daughter's murderers now sentenced to 22 years minimum for Scarlett Jenkinson and 20 years minimum for Eddie Ratcliffe. Hopefully, now knowing that their daughter's murderers will be behind bars for at least 2 decades, will bring them some sort of closure.
And Sophie, as the parents departed the area, was there any significant sign of emotion from them? They've been through the most horrendous situation. We saw when these murderers were originally sentenced, Jenkins and Ratcliffe. Those victim impact statements were just incredibly moving. In fact, when I reported on it, I found myself reduced to tears.
That really doesn't surprise me, Martin. In the court, we all were feeling the emotions as well. The judge even commented on the atmosphere in the room, how heartbreaking it was. It really, truly was really quite poignant. As I mentioned before, Esther, Brianna's mother, was unable to read her statement out loud today, and that had to be done for her. We also heard a statement from Brianna's sister, which I thought was truly heartbreaking. She said that she'd learned to grow with Brianna, and now that Brianna was gone, she felt that she wouldn't be able to grow anymore.
Okay, Sophie Reaper, thank you for that update. from outside Manchester Crown Court, and of course this is the sentencing of the murderers of Brianna Joyce Scarlett Jenkinson, a minimum term of 22 years. Her accomplice Eddie Ratcliffe, a minimum term of 20 years. Serving was Mrs. Justice Yip at Manchester Crown Court. Started off by saying no one will ever know what Brianna was capable of. The parents' loss is unimaginable. Detailed 28 deep stab wounds to the head, neck and back. Defensive injuries showed that Brianna had tried to defend herself until the end. Details you cannot imagine any parent ever hearing. Of course, we'll have a full update on this story throughout the next 2 hours on the show. But please stay with us. An astonishing case. Now we're going to your weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. A bright and blustery day on Saturday across the north, a mild day in the south, and in between there will be some thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain, courtesy of this weather front, which is slicing between high pressure to the south and low pressure to the north, bringing thicker cloud and a bit of rain as it trickles south through Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, northern England overnight. Still very gusty at the moment over northeast England and southeast Scotland. The winds will steadily ease, but staying very windy in the far north with more showers here. In the far south, it stays very mild, with temperatures remaining in double digits. In fact, most of England and Wales will hold up at 9 or 10 Celsius. A little colder further north, but still very blustery here on Saturday. More showers to come across the Highlands and the Western Isles, but some sunshine for southern and eastern Scotland, much of Northern Ireland, and much of northern England as well. Quite dull and damp in West Wales, and during the day, some of that rain may spread back up across parts of northern England into East Anglia. Much of the south, though, just dry, but fairly drab. Mild, however, temperatures getting into the teens, a colder feel further north. Sunday sees some patchy rain spreading from Wales to Northern Ireland and turning damp in western parts of Scotland, but probably not much rain getting to the east coast. Again, much of the south just dry and cloudy. It will be quite windy throughout the weekend, but it's going to stay mild with temperatures again in the teens.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to GB News. It's 4 o'clock and I'm Martin Daubney. Now, in the last hour, the killers of teenager Brianna Ghey have been sentenced. Scarlett Jenkinson was given a minimum term of 22 years in prison. Her accomplice, Eddie Ratcliffe, was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years. I'll have reaction to that horrific story throughout the hour. I'll also have an update on the search for the suspect in the chemical attack, Abdul Azidi. Now it's time for your latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Martin. Good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Some breaking news in the last hour. 2 teenagers who killed Brianna Ghey in what the judge described as a sadistic and brutal stabbing have both been given a life sentence for murder. 16-year-old Scarlett Jenkinson will serve a minimum term of 22 years. Eddie Ratcliffe, also 16, will serve a minimum term of 20 years. The teenagers committed the murder in broad daylight on the 11th of February last year, stabbing Brianna 23 times in a park. In victim statements read to the court earlier, Brianna's family described both killers as 2 predators stalking their prey and called them pure evil. Judge Amanda Yip told Manchester Crown Court that Brianna's injuries showed that she was killed with exceptional brutality. Some more breaking news. A manhunt is still underway for suspected chemical attacker Abdul Azidi. He was last seen boarding an underground train on the Victoria line. Police say the 31-year-old mother who was attacked is still sedated in hospital with life-changing injuries. It comes after Rishi Sunak says foreign criminals should not be allowed to stay in the UK following the manhunt for the refugee and sex offender Abdul Azidi. Police Commander John Saville gave a statement earlier and called on Azidi to hand himself in.
If you've seen Azedi or you know where he is, then I urge you please to contact our hotline, which is 0207 175 2784, or of course you can phone Crime Stoppers. If you think you've seen Azedi now, do not approach him, ring 999 and we will be there urgently. We need the public's help to trace Azedi. It's really important.
A student who ran over and killed her fiancé after she lost her temper following an argument between them has been sentenced to life in prison. Alice Wood will serve a minimum term of 18 years for the murder of Ryan Watson. The 24-year-old was found guilty of killing Ryan, also 24, following a trial at Chester Crown Court last month. He was hit by a Ford Fiesta Alice was driving near their home in Cheshire, which she had claimed was a tragic accident. Now, in some other news coming to us in the last hour, a man has died after falling from the Tate Modern near the River Thames in London. Police, air ambulance and paramedics attended the scene, but despite the efforts, the man died at the scene. The Metropolitan Police says inquiries are underway to identify the man. The death is currently being treated as unexpected, but is not thought to be suspicious. And charges against Greta Thunberg have been thrown out in court. The climate campaigner has appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court for a public order offence after protesting in London last year. She was arrested during the demonstration near Mayfair in October as oil executives met for the Energy Intelligence Forum. However, Judge John Law said today that police had tried to impose unlawful conditions during the protest. Greta and 4 other activists pleaded not guilty in November to blocking the entrance to the meeting. There are fresh warnings of potential human rights breaches on the BB Stockholm barge as asylum seekers face what's being described as claustrophobic conditions. The Home Affairs Select Committee says cramped living conditions are contributing to a decline in mental health for some residents. The cost of housing asylum claimants on the barge is £120 per person per night. It comes as the Home Office has asked for an emergency £2.6 billion after spending more than expected on asylum accommodation. In a written statement, James Cleverly made the request for contingency fund advance last year. The government spent around £8 million a day for migrant accommodation, with official figures showing more than 50,000 were housed in hotel rooms. And the government's offering a £1,000 sign-on bonus for those to join the childcare sector. It's part of a £6.5 million recruitment scheme and comes just 2 months before the first phase of a flagship childcare expansion. It follows the Chancellor's announcement in March last year. Eligible families of children as young as 9 months will be able to claim 30 hours of free childcare a week. Children and Families Minister David Johnston told us the government is giving working families the support they need.
When children are between 0 and 5 years old, a huge proportion of their brain development happens, up to 80% of their brain development, and that has a big role on what happens to them as children, young people, and then as adults. And so the biggest reason for people to look at this sector is the huge difference they can make to children at the earliest stage. We've already seen over 102,000 parents claim this new offer, which is really strong demand, and it shows that this is something that people out there really want and that's going to make a huge difference to their family finances.
And for all the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
So welcome to the show, and we start with the tragic murder of Brianna Ghey. And in the last hour, Eddie Ratcliffe and Scarlett Jenkinson have been sentenced. Jenkinson must serve a minimum of 22 years. Ratcliffe, meanwhile, her accomplice, was given a minimum of 20 years. Let's cross now to Manchester Crown Court and speak to GB News' reporter Sophie Reaper. Sophie, you're in the court when the judgment was passed down. What was the reaction?
Well, for the 2 murderers in the room, Jenkinson and Ratcliffe, there really was no kind of reaction. Throughout the sentencing, there was the odd nervous twitch. Jenkinson was twiddling with her thumbs. Ratcliffe was nervously bouncing his knees up and down. But once Justice Yip told them their sentences, 22 years minimum for Jenkinson, 20 years minimum for Ratcliffe, there was no real outward reaction whatsoever. Now, today, on the day of the sentencing, it is just 9 days until the 1-year anniversary of Brianna Ghey's death, and it's quite poignant that today they've been sentenced to those respective sentences. But here's a little reminder about this case, which truly shocks the nation. Teenage murderers, Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe, known until now as Girl X and Boy Y, have finally had their identities revealed to the public. In February of last year, the then 15-year-olds carefully planned and executed the brutal murder of transgender teenager Brianna Ghey. A piece of paper found in Scarlett's bedroom outlined the details of their plot to kill. The pair lured their victim to Linear Park in Warrington under the pretense of taking drugs. There, Brianna would be stabbed 28 times with a hunting knife belonging to Eddie. Her body was discovered by a couple who had simply gone to the park to walk their dog, but instead had to make the 999 call, which would later be used as part of the prosecution's case against Jenkinson and Ratcliffe.
You are under arrest on suspicion of murder. Obviously you are under caution, so anything you say is getting recorded. Okay?
What if me being suspect is because, like, I was the last person seen her, or, like, how come I'm suspect?
Pardon?
Like, how come I'm a suspect?
How come you're a
Is it
suspect?
because I'm the last person that's seen her, or is it?
You Eddie?
Yeah.
Eddie, you're locked up suspicion of murder, all right? You don't have to say anything, but you may harm you eventually. Don't mention when questioned. So you later line in court, and if you do say evidence, do you understand?
Yeah.
In their trial at Manchester Crown Court, the two teens turned against one another, each blaming the other for Brianna's death. But in the end, the jury found them both guilty of her murder. Sophie Reaper, GB News. Now, we heard there that throughout the trial back in December that both Jenkinson and Ratcliffe pleaded not guilty and instead blamed the other. But one interesting thing that came out of court today is that Scarlett Jenkinson has now admitted to her part in Brianna's murder. Now, we heard from Justice Yip that, in fact, she's given several variations on this story, but that she in one version said that Eddie had thrown Brianna to the floor. He had then stabbed her 3 or 4 times, but then panicked. So then Scarlett snatched the knife from him and continued the job herself. She's admitted that this is something she found satisfying and exciting. She also said that it was her plan to take a token of Brianna away, some flesh or an eyeball perhaps. So really rather horrifying details that have emerged today here at Manchester Crown Court.
Okay, Sophie Reaper, thanks for joining us on this astonishing case. Thanks for that update. And joining me now is the former Metropolitan Police Senior Investigating Officer, Peter Kirkham. Peter, welcome to the show. An astonishing case. Judgment passed down, summing up earlier, Mrs Justice Yip at Manchester Crown Court, serving out 22 years for Jenkinson and 20 years for Ratcliffe, and clearly saying this was premeditated, cold, calculated, a murder of a particularly sadistic and brutal nature. Scarlett's primary motive was your deep desire to kill. And Eddie, you actively participated in this sadistic murder. Do you feel, Peter, that today justice has been served?
Justice has been served. Whether or not the people think that the sentence is appropriate is another matter entirely. But justice is the public investigation of the facts and the public sentencing of the individuals in accordance with the criminal justice system. So to that extent, justice has definitely been served. Anybody who looks at the sentence and says, oh, I think this is a bit light, which they may well do, needs to bear in mind a couple of things. First of all, if they listen to the judge's sentencing remarks, she spoke for about half an hour from just before 3 o'clock onwards. She covered any number of different aspects of the case, and you cannot but say that her approach to it was thorough. She has got sentencing guidelines issued by Parliament that she has to operate within. And taking all those things together, personally, I think it's about right. The second thing they need to bear in mind is that this is a minimum period before parole is considered. So they will serve the whole of that 20 and 22 years, and then they'll have to apply for parole. And that parole will only be granted if and when the authorities are satisfied they're no longer a danger to the public. And in practice, what that usually means is at least some time in addition to those minimum tariffs before they're actually released. If they're ever released at all, they could remain in prison for the rest of their lives. So you need to bear in mind those caveats, really, if you think the sentence is light. But certainly justice has been served in that the facts have been examined and they've been convicted and they have been sentenced certainly in the ballpark of reasonable sentences.
And Peter Kirkham, Mrs. Justice Yip, gave us an incredibly meticulous, thorough and detailed analysis of how she reached her decision. And she took into account this key point of Scarlett in particular. She said, "You have lied so many times, it's impossible to know what's even true." And she said clearly, "You even suggested that you want to kill again. You have shown no remorse."
Yes, I mean, those sorts of things mark it out as a somewhat unusual case. We rarely see such deliberate and pre-planned and talked about and thought about and planned about murders taking place. We see lots of murders, but they tend to be spur of the moment sort of things, things where someone has got involved in something and in some sort of rage produces a weapon and someone dies, or they're involved in some sort of criminal enterprise and someone dies and it wasn't really the plan from the outset. It's quite rare to find something like this where someone has planned for some time and attempted, I believe, attempted or intended to carry out the plan they'd come up with, only for it to be thwarted by Brianna not sort of responding to text messages or whatever, and then they have another go. And so this sort of pre-planned approach to murder is fortunately very rare, but it makes for a very difficult situation in relation to what do you do with these people who think like that and operate like that.
And Peter, a particularly fascinating tranche of the evidence that Mrs. Justice Yip was telling us off the back of the Valdo Colocane case, the mitigating circumstance, the potential for mental illness. An excellent summary. She said that Scarlett was suffering from a severe form of conduct social disorder, but she said that you were more than able to plan. Knowing what you were doing was criminal. She detailed that Scarlett was not mature, had been self-harming, had anorexia and autism when she was younger, and also an ADHD diagnosis, but discounted that to one side, putting the primary notion on the fact she knew what she was doing and she actually wanted to do it.
Exactly. Where people have got mental illnesses and mental disorders, sometimes it will remove some sort of degree of culpability from them. It may get in the way of the required intent that's needed to convict for a certain offence. And in the case of murder, you need to show an intent to kill or an intent to cause really serious harm. Well, that was plainly there. Not just from one-off comment made, but from a series of comments and things written down, so there's no doubt about the recollection of the words spoken or anything like that. And so sometimes a mental disorder will get in the way of proving an intent, and sometimes a mental disorder will amount to a full defence in a variety of circumstances that are quite rare. But we've seen recently where a murder charge was allowed to proceed by the prosecution to a plea of guilty to manslaughter. And there was the discussion of whether or not the mental illnesses of that individual were rightly taken into account in terms of interfering with the ability to prove murder to the degree that manslaughter was appropriate. Every case is different and every case must be tested on its facts. Just because someone has a particular disorder doesn't automatically mean they will or they will not be liable for their actions to the criminal degree. Here we have seen the judge, despite knowing everything she could possibly know about them, and some things are just not knowable, she's come to the conclusion that yes, they're both culpable. And quite rightly too, if you ask me.
OK, Peter Kirkham, former Metropolitan Police Senior Investigating Officer, thank you for your expert analysis of that. And for more reaction to this, I'm now joined in the studio by the Conservative MP for Shipley, Philip Davies. Philip, thank you so much for joining us. I want to ask you a question about the the premeditation of this. Clearly, lots of planning. Scarlett Jenkinson kept detailed dossiers of serial killers she was obsessed with, the details of how Jeffrey Dahmer killed. They spent time on the dark web. Eddie Ratcliffe, obsessed with knives, a kickboxer. And yet, I want to ask you about this thorny topic of nature versus nurture. Can you learn to be a killer like this by what you absorb, what you read, what you see on the internet? Or, Philip, is there something more intrinsic, something deeper, something evil?
It's a good question, Martin. I don't know if I know the answer. I suspect it's an element of both nature and nurture. I suspect you end up being the person you are based on nature and your upbringing, I guess. I mean, it's quite... I mean, this is awfully evil. I mean, I can't be the only person who is struck by the thought that this is like the modern-day Myra Hindley and, she seems sort of particularly evil. And whether they're the new Myra Hindley and Brady, I don't know, but it certainly strikes you that way. They are clearly just evil people. Whether how that's come about, Lord only knows. I personally think they've got away quite lightly with those minimum tariffs. To be perfectly honest, you couldn't possibly give them any less than that, and we still face the prospect. I'd toss the key away personally, because we still face the prospect that they could still leave prison at a relatively young age. And that, to me, would be completely unacceptable.
OK, thanks for that. Stick around. We'll come back to you on other stuff shortly. We'll have lots more on this horrific story at 5 o'clock. And there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com, and you've helped to make it the fastest-growing national news website in the country. So thank you very much. Now, police say they've found significant and important evidence as they hunt for Abdul Azidi, the sex offender who's a suspect in the chemical attack case. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Big news, big debate, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show, every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's coming up to 4:24. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, a suspected chemical attacker has been urged to do the right thing and hand himself into the police after officers found significant and important evidence during 5 searches. After causing significant injuries to a mother and daughter in Clapham, the 35-year-old Abdulazidi was last seen at 9 p.m. on Wednesday night on the Victoria Tube line heading south out of London. We now know he had been rejected by asylum twice and granted it the 3rd time after being convicted of a sexual offence back in 2018 and after having converted to Christianity. Well, I'm joined now in the studio by our political editor, Christopher Hope, and also the Conservative MP for Shipley, Philip Davies, still with me. Phil, let's go to you first. Chris, so the details of that press conference, for those who missed it, from Commander John Saville at New Scotland Yard, the mother very poorly. The mother is sedated and will have life-changing injuries. The children got off slightly luckier, shall we say. No, they will be traumatised for many, many years to come, but they are not as poorly and they do not, it is thought, have life-changing injuries. However, he's still at large. The police are appealing for him to turn himself in. But the conversation now, inevitably, Chris, has already turned to why. How on earth can a man with a previous track record for sexual offences be granted asylum in the United Kingdom at the 3rd time of asking?
After a sexual offence, as you said.
Yes.
I mean, it is extraordinary. You have got people who aren't in government on the Tory side, Robert Jenrick, former Immigration Minister, calling for an immediate investigation of his asylum situation, a detailed review by the Home Secretary. Trella Braben's concerned. We will hear from Philip Davies shortly, who have things to say on this. Number 10 for its part is saying it's a live police investigation. Nothing they say now can help. The politics will play out when this man is caught. They point out that there are rules at the moment. If you are sentenced for a crime for more than 12 months in prison, you shouldn't be given asylum. Some would say that's a bare minimum, but that's what the rules are at the moment. And if you arrive here illegally, you should be deported. We know about the Rwanda bill going through the House of Lords at the moment. That's the politics, but whether that lasts, I think this could be, for many, a turning point in the way this country deals with asylum seekers. This individual came from Afghanistan. You know, he looked like a genuine case, but his behaviour when he got here was not appropriate, you could argue. And there were question marks about why on earth he was allowed to stay. Converting to Christianity was a reason, because he might risk persecution if he went back to his homeland. One would assume, again, the details are emerging, but it is, I think, in an election year, this will become a totemic story.
Well, that's a key point. I can turn now to Philip Davies. Phil, a lot of people are saying that Abdulazidi is the embodiment of everything that's wrong with the British asylum system. He came in illegally on a lorry. He was refused asylum twice, a known criminal of a sexual nature, 2 separate offences, one a sexual assault, one we believe for flashing. He then goes on to get asylum after the 3rd time, after suddenly becoming a Christian. A lot of people today are saying, what's the point of the British asylum system if people like this are allowed to stay in the country?
I'd agree with them. I mean, it's an absolute disgrace, to be perfectly honest. I mean, this is the defining political issue of our times, in my opinion, the whole issue of immigration and asylum. I think that is now the defining political issue. And we've got to get this sorted out one way or the other. The problem is, for too many years, we've had sort of all these do-gooders, whether it's vicars in the Church of England vouching for somebody to turn into Christianity in order to avoid them being deported. They need to be hanging their heads in shame today, whoever that happened to be in this particular case. You know, we had the Labour MP trying to stop planes flying off to Jamaica full of criminals and all the rest of it, and sending letters. We've got to get rid of this do-gooding kind of attitude. We're allowing people into the country with no idea who they are, what they're capable of doing. And quite frankly, the public have quite rightly had enough. I've had enough. Lots of my colleagues have had enough. I suspect the government's had enough. The officials in the Home Office, I think, have been running riot, and ministers, a succession of ministers, haven't really got to grips with it. We can't afford this to carry on any longer. These people shouldn't be allowed into the country. They should be deported straight away. It's one of the reasons why the Rwanda policy is so important, so we can get them straight on a plane and straight out. It's why that policy is absolutely crucial. But we can't have a situation where people are foreign nationals.
Phil, you're talking like somebody who's not in government.
Well, I'm not in government.
No, but you are. Your party,
well,
your pals. No, you've been running the country for 14 years. You sound like a viewer upset about this, but you're in government. Why can't you or your pals, you with the PM last night at a big glamorous bash in Leicester Square, sort it out?
Yeah, well, I think, to be fair, I think the Prime Minister is sorting it out. He hasn't been in office for 14 years. I mean, we had 5 years of a coalition. We had a couple of years of
the Tories are in charge.
Well, that was a coalition. A couple of years of no majority in Parliament. You've got to remember that in those 14 years. But yes, I agree. This has been going on far too long. It should have been sorted out. I think Rishi Sunak is sorting it out. That's why the Rwanda bill's so important. And that's why I suspect that issue will probably become a really big issue at the general election, about why it's so important that as soon as people arrive in the country illegally, we have somewhere to send them. Because, of course, you've got to remember, lots of these people come and destroy their documents. So, you know, you've got nowhere to send them back to. You have to send them to a third country. And that's why Rwanda's so important. And I suspect Keir Starmer is going to come under a hell of a lot of pressure in the election because his policy is to do absolutely nothing with these people because he's got nowhere to send them to.
OK, Philip Davis, Chris, we have to leave it there. And just so you're aware, we can show you now some new footage. GBNews viewers can see some new footage just released by the police of Abdul Azidi. In that press conference earlier, Commander John Saville said that they will be releasing new images. There he is, Abdul Azidi. He was on the underground. You can see significant injuries to the right-hand side of his face. Clearly, some of that alkali solution he used as a weapon was put upon himself. The police commander said, Abdul, you need medical help. Do the right thing and turn yourself in. Some may say that's asking for quite a lot for this individual to do the right thing, but he is still at large. 5 search warrants have been issued in London, in East London, and also in Newcastle. Yet for now, this man, Abdul Azidi, still remains at large and the significant target of a police manhunt. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock after Mike Freer announced yesterday that he's quitting as an MP after receiving death threats. In a few minutes, I'll speak to an expert who says Islamism is destroying British democracy. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Martin. It's 4:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The 2 teenagers who killed Brianna Ghey in what the judge described as a sadistic and brutal stabbing have both been given a life sentence for murder. 16-year-old Scarlett Jenkinson will serve a minimum term of 22 years. Eddie Ratcliffe, also 16, will serve a minimum term of 20 years. The teenagers committed the murder in broad daylight on the 11th of February last year, stabbing Brianna 23 times in a park. In victim statements read to the court earlier, Brianna's family described both killers as 2 predators stalking their prey and called them pure evil. Judge Amanda Yip told Manchester Crown Court that Brianna's injuries showed that she was killed with exceptional brutality. A manhunt is still underway for suspected chemical attacker and refugee Abdul Azidi. As it's emerged, officers have found significant and important new evidence. The Metropolitan Police have released a new image of Azidi, last seen at King's Cross Underground Station on Wednesday evening. Police say the 31-year-old mother who was attacked is still sedated in hospital with life-changing injuries. It comes after Rishi Sunak says foreign criminals should not be allowed to stay in the UK following the manhunt. A student who ran over and killed her fiancé after she lost her temper following an argument between them has been sentenced to life in prison. Alice Wood will serve a minimum term of 18 years for the murder of Ryan Watson. The 24-year-old was found guilty of killing Ryan, also 24, following a trial at Chester Crown Court last month. He was hit by a Ford Fiesta Alice was driving near their home in Cheshire, which she had claimed was a tragic accident. And a man has died after falling from the Tate Modern near the River Thames in London. Police, air ambulance and paramedics attended the scene, but despite the efforts, the man died at the scene. The gallery, which is one of the most visited art museums in the world, will remain closed following the incident. The death is currently being treated as unexpected, but it is not thought to be suspicious. And there are fresh warnings of potential human rights breaches on the BB Stockholm barge as asylum seekers face what's being described as claustrophobic conditions. The Home Affairs Select Committee says cramped living conditions are contributing to a decline in mental health for some residents. It follows confirmation from the Home Office that the cost of housing migrants on the barge is £120 per person per night. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2652 and €1.1716. The price of gold is £1,609.40 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,617 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Now, I spent much of yesterday's show talking about the shocking news that Mike Freer will stand down as a minister at the next election because of fears of his own public safety. Freer said he'd received death threats from Muslims Against Crusades. The Justice Minister also says he only avoided being murdered by terrorist Ali Harbi Ali by the skin of his teeth. And, of course, Ali went on to kill fellow Conservative MP Sir David Amess. Well, Dr. Rakib Hassan is a social policy analyst who's written an article for The Telegraph today that has the frightening yet sobering headline, Islamism is destroying British democracy. And Rakib joins me now. Thank you for joining us on the show, Rakib. Islam is destroying British democracy. Would you care to detail why you think that's the case?
Well, firstly, we have an MP here who's ultimately being driven out of politics as a result of Islamist intimidation and harassment. Now, in the spirit of honesty, Martin, I would say that I have very different views to Mike Freer when it comes to Israel-Palestine. But the point is that we're talking about an MP who's been elected by his local constituents and returned to the Commons on 4 consecutive occasions. And I believe that being a part of being a mature British citizen is accepting the plurality of views over a range of domestic and geopolitical matters, including those of a decidedly sensitive nature. And I think that this is just yet another example of what I call the Islamist-inspired erosion of British parliamentary democracy.
And it's not just parliamentary democracy, Rakib, that's being eroded. We're seeing multiple cases in our schools. Catherine Birbalsingh at the Michaela Academy, death threats, bomb threats, smash windows after she introduced a Muslim prayer ban. The Sparkley School in Leighton sent a pupil home for wearing a Palestinian flag. That's had bomb threats. And, of course, the Batley Grammar School teacher still in hiding over 2 years on. And, Rakib, there's a central ideology behind all of these incidents, isn't there?
Well, I'd make the point that I'm personally, Martin, a member of a racial, ethnic and religious minority, and I'm deeply appreciative of the rights, freedoms and protections which are allocated under British democracy. But I think the issue here is that those rights, protections and freedoms, they're being exploited in the name of religio-political tribalism. They're not being appreciated by certain elements of the British Muslim population in line with the common good. And I think that is a very serious problem. And as you say, it's not just politicians under threat, it's also schools. You see that Islamist intimidation. And I make the point that some of the stories which have emerged from Michaela's school is that you had Muslim pupils coercing co-religious peers into participating into various forms of religious activity. And I think the point to make there is that there's Islamist intimidation, not just towards non-Muslims, but also within British Muslim communities.
OK, Rakib, you very eloquently identified the problem. What's the solution? Do we need new laws, or do we have existing laws, but yet there's a reluctance, there's a fear to actually enforce and police them?
Well, I think that there's a culture of political correctness, but also fear within our public institutions when it comes to tackling Islamist activity in the public sphere. I think you've certainly seen that with the policing of recent protests which have taken place in London, where there has been anti-Semitic chanting, as well as the displaying of pro-terror paraphernalia. And I also think a real issue here is that many of these tribal ideologues, they managed to worm their way into state institutions, taxpayer-funded bodies. And I think that's even the case when it comes to institutions in the law and order space. So what we actually need a full audit exploring people's potential links with problematic organisations and indeed extremist organisations which may be prescribed by the Home Office, and they need to be weeded out of the British state and they need to be disempowered. And I think crucially, I'd make this point, Martin, we need to break away from this multicultural model where we empower so-called community leaders who are anything but representative of the communities that they belong to.
OK, Rakib Ehsan, thank you for joining us on the show, bravely speaking out about the threat of Islamist extremism in Britain. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Now, the French farmers' protests, they are working. Vive la révolution, because Emmanuel Macron has been forced into a major climb down by opposing an EU deal with South American countries. They've had a result. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel. 2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:44. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, at 5 o'clock, we'll have reaction after the teenage killers of Brianna Ghey were sentenced earlier this afternoon. Now, we've been covering the farmers' protests across Europe for quite a few weeks now, I'm happy to say, and now it turns out that the efforts by the French are working. Emmanuel Macron has been forced into a major climb down by opposing an EU deal with South American countries. Well, the spirit of La Révolution is alive, and I'm joined now live from Paris by journalist David Chazan. David, thank you for joining us. So we've been covering this story with huge interest from this side of the channel. Le Tractor Boys first went on to Paris, then they headed to Brussels, and it seems it's had an immediate and effective impact. Talk us through that.
Well, it certainly does, Martin, because the French government's been forced to cough up hundreds of millions of euros in additional aid, and they've also done a U-turn on a plan that would have halved the amount of pesticides used on French farms. That's been shelved for the time being. And President Macron, of course, as you were saying in the intro, is vetoing the so-called Mercosur free trade deal with South American countries. French farmers were particularly concerned about competition from Argentinian and Brazilian beef and also other produce, because they say it's not being produced to the same standards in South America and the costs are much lower. So they're saying that this is unfair competition.
Yeah, and David, it's a fair point, and it has echoes of Brexit, dare I say it. This is a fair deal for French farmers being swamped by cheap imports from the continent, from Asia, from Africa. They cannot compete. They're earning centimes, pennies in comparison. They're going out of business. They've cried enough as enough, and it's worked. How much is this to just make these bad optics go away, David, and how much of it is actually, we're having some rather significant European elections coming up in France?
Yeah, the European elections in June are going to be very significant. At the moment, Marine Le Pen's anti-immigration party is polling very strongly for those elections. It seems set to win more seats than any other French political party, and her party and other right-wing groups have been trying to capitalise on the farmers' protests by backing them very strongly. And Mr. Macron is determined to minimise his losses, if you like, in the European elections. So that's another reason for these big concessions that he's had to make. But this goes far beyond France. Remember, these protests began in the Netherlands, then they went to Germany, then France. They've now spread to countries including Poland, Romania, Bulgaria. And all of these European farmers are concerned about unfair competition, but also the EU's green agenda, which they say is unfairly penalising them by imposing burdensome environmental rules that are making it very difficult for them to turn a profit. And of course, they're also complaining about low prices being forced on them by the retail chains. And that's something that the French government, at least, is also promising to address.
Now, David, can I ask you, a lot of people in Britain, a lot of farmers we've been speaking to throughout the week would like a bit of this revolutionary spirit on British soil. What's the reaction been like from the French public? 'Cause of course, the farmers initially tried to block all 8 major routes into Paris. They blocked the biggest food market in Paris. Is the court of public opinion largely on side with the farmers, or are the French getting a bit fed up of it now?
No, I think public opinion has been extremely supportive of the farmers. A lot of French people are saying, look, these are the people who put food on our tables. They're finding it hard to make ends meet. We need to do something about this problem. Now, whether that actually translates into people being prepared to pay higher prices for food is a whole different matter. But for the time being, yes, the farmers stopped short of carrying the protests to a point where food was running short in cities like Paris. And so for the time being, the public are still on side.
You know, who would have thought, David Chazan, they say not all heroes wear capes, but who'd have thought that heroes drive tractors? And they've been doing this across France, across Germany, across the Netherlands, across Poland. And this spirit, this defiance, making people understand that they need food, they need farmers. Don't take us for granted. David, this is the magnificent thing.
Well, I think it's raised public awareness of some of the difficulties of what we used to call globalization and some of the free trade deals that the EU is seeking to do, as well as its environmental rules. And it's certainly a bit of a wake-up call for the EU, for the French government, for governments elsewhere. And I think it's just brought home to them that they do need to take greater account of the demands and the needs of their own farmers and not just focus on the principles of very strict environmental rules and the desire to do new free trade deals.
OK, David Chazan, thank you for joining us live from Paris. And I, for one, raise a glass to Le Tractor Boys. Now, dozens of homes remain empty after being needlessly bought by HS2 before the Birmingham to Manchester line was scrapped. Residents left behind claim they had been plagued by squatters and even cannabis factories. Now, locals in a village in Staffordshire are campaigning for HS2 to sell the properties that they bought up. Jack Carson has this report.
House after house, all of them empty. In the quaint village of Whitmore, the impact of HS2 brings a ghostly feel. Around 50 houses in Madeley and Whitmore in Staffordshire were purchased by HS2 to make way for the second leg of the high-speed railway from Birmingham to Manchester. In the months and years since, HS2 say 79% of lettable residential and agricultural properties in their portfolio are currently let. They say others are either being refurbished on the market, held for construction, or are not financially viable to bring up to a lettable standard. But now, with the second leg scrapped,
I am ending this long-running saga. I am cancelling the rest of the HS2 project.
Residents say they want their community back.
And here we have an empty house. It's been empty for 2 years. It's been chained up, and we don't know what status this house is in. It's been when they're empty for 2 years, there's no heating. It could be in any state whatsoever.
Deborah Mallender has been campaigning against HS2 in Whitmore for years.
And they've caused a lot of problems for people. People have been forced out of their homes when they didn't want to go. And some of these people have died shortly afterwards. Cannabis farms and squatters have come here. And none of that is good for the area. None of it looks good, sounds good. And we just can't understand how on earth could that possibly have happened when HS2 people were supposed to be looking after them.
But with properties still empty, Deborah wants answers from HS2.
People are thinking, why haven't they been sold? This is a community that should be up, thriving. Families should be here and going to the local schools and so on, and involving themselves in local community projects of one sort or another. Where are they? Where are the families? Why aren't these houses up for sale?
In response to the concerns raised, a HS2 spokesperson told GB News all homes acquired for the HS2 project in Madeley and Whitmore Heath were sold voluntarily, that is, without using any compulsory purchase powers. The allegation that anyone was forced out of their home is completely incorrect. They added that since 2019, 3 properties sold to the HS2 programme and let on the private rental market to help recoup costs to the taxpayer were targeted by cannabis growers. In all cases, the police took action after neighbours and an electricity supplier reported suspicious activity at the properties. HS2 takes the safety and security of the public and everyone involved with the project extremely seriously. For Deborah and this community, the scrapped second leg of HS2 leaves an emptiness that doesn't feel like it's going away. Jack Carson, GB News, Whitmore.
Now, the killers of teenager Brianna Jai have been sentenced this afternoon. Scarlett Jenkinson was given a minimum of 22 years in prison. Eddie Ratcliffe, her accomplice, was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years. You've had loads and loads of emails coming in on this. Jean says, I think it's a disgrace they got 22 years. They should have got a lot longer. Life should mean life. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. A bright and blustery day on Saturday across the north, a mild day in the south, and in between there will be some thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain, courtesy of this weather front, which is slicing between high pressure to the south and low pressure to the north, bringing thicker cloud and a bit of rain as it trickles south through Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, northern England overnight. Still very gusty at the moment over northeast England and southeast Scotland. The winds will steadily ease, but staying very windy in the far north with more showers here. In the far south, it stays very mild, with temperatures remaining in double digits. In fact, most of England and Wales will hold up at 9 or 10 Celsius. A little colder further north, but still very blustery here on Saturday. More showers to come across the Highlands and the Western Isles, but some sunshine for southern and eastern Scotland, much of Northern Ireland, and much of northern England as well. Quite dull and damp in West Wales, and during the day, some of that rain may spread back up across parts of northern England into East Anglia. Much of the south, though, just dry, but fairly drab. Mild, however, temperatures getting into the teens, a colder feel further north. Sunday sees some patchy rain spreading from Wales to Northern Ireland and turning damp in western parts of Scotland, but probably not much rain getting to the east coast. Again, much of the south just dry and cloudy. It will be quite windy throughout the weekend, but it's going to stay mild with temperatures again in the teens.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show, every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to GB News. It's 5 p.m. and I'm Martin Daubney. In the last few hours, the killers of teenager Brianna Ghey have been sentenced. Scarlett Jenkinson was given a minimum of 22 years in prison. Her accomplice, Eddie Ratcliffe, was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years. And we'll have the rest of the day's news as well. The manhunt for Abdul Azidi, the main suspect in the chemical attack, is continuing. Abdul was last seen boarding the Victoria Line tube heading south on Wednesday night in London, and police are appealing to the public. And there's a blow to Home Secretary James Cleverly. A potential returns agreement to send migrants back to Turkey appears unlikely now to go ahead after the Home Office said the country where millions of Brits go on holiday isn't safe. So, as usual, I'd love to hear from you. Please email me your views, gbviews@gbnews.com. Those sentences of 22 years and 20 years for the murder of Brianna Ghey. Do you think that's fair? Do you think that justice has been served? And what about Abdul Azidi? How did this guy get asylum at the 3rd attempt in Britain after converting to Christianity, despite the fact he committed 2 sex offences? Please get in touch all the usual ways. But before all of that, it's time for your latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thank you, Martin. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 5. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. 2 teenagers who killed Brianna Ghey in what the judge described as sadistic and brutal stabbing have both been given a life sentence for murder. 16-year-old Scarlett Jenkinson will serve a minimum term of 22 years. Eddie Ratcliffe, also 16, will serve a minimum term of 20 years. The teenagers committed the murder in broad daylight on the 11th of February last year, stabbing Brianna 23 times in a park. In victim statements read to the court earlier, Brianna's family described both killers as two predators stalking their prey and called them pure evil. Judge Amanda Yip told Manchester Crown Court that Brianna's injuries showed she was killed with exceptional brutality. A manhunt is still underway for suspected chemical attacker and refugee Abdul Azidi. As it's emerged, officers have found significant and important new evidence. Police say the 31-year-old mother who was attacked is still sedated in hospital with life-changing injuries. It comes after Rishi Sunak says foreign criminals should not be allowed to stay in the UK following the manhunt. Police Commander John Saville gave a statement earlier and urged the public to help trace Azidi.
If you've seen Azidi or you know where he is, then I urge you please to contact our hotline, which is 0207 175 2784, or of course you can phone Crime Stoppers. If you think you've seen Azedi now, do not approach him, ring 999 and we will be there urgently. We need the public's help to trace Azedi. It's really important.
A student who ran over and killed her fiancé after she lost her temper following an argument between them has been sentenced to life in prison. Alice Wood will serve a minimum term of 18 years for the murder of Ryan Watson. The 24-year-old was found guilty of killing Ryan, also 24, following a trial at Chester Crown Court last month. He was hit by the Ford Fiesta Alice was driving near their home in Cheshire, which she had claimed was a tragic accident. In other news, a man has died after falling from the Tate Modern near the River Thames in London. Police, air ambulance and paramedics attended the scene, but despite the efforts, the man died at the scene. The gallery, which is one of the most visited art museums in the world, will remain closed following the incident. The death is currently being treated as unexpected, but it's not thought to be suspicious. And there are fresh warnings of potential human rights breaches on the BB Stockholm barge as asylum seekers face what's being described as claustrophobic conditions. The Home Affairs Select Committee says cramped living conditions are contributing to a decline in mental health for some residents. The cost of housing asylum claimants on the barge is £120 per person per night. It comes as the Home Office has asked for an emergency £2.6 billion after spending more than expected on asylum accommodation. Last year, the government spent around £8 million a day for migrant accommodation, with official figures showing more than 50,000 were housed in hotel rooms. And charges against Greta Thunberg have been thrown out in court. The climate campaigner has appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court for a public order offence after protesting in London last year. She was arrested during the demonstration near Mayfair in October as oil executives met for the Energy Intelligence Forum. However, Judge John Law said today that police had tried to impose unlawful conditions during the protest. Greta and 4 other activists pleaded not guilty in November to blocking the entrance to the meeting. And the government is offering a £1,000 sign-on bonus for those to join childcare sector. It's part of a £6.5 million recruitment scheme and comes just 2 months before the first phase of a flagship childcare expansion. It follows the Chancellor's announcement in March last year that eligible families of children as young as 9 months will be able to claim 30 hours of free childcare a week. Children and Families Minister David Johnston told us the government is giving working families the support they need.
When children are between 0 and 5 years old, a huge proportion of their brain development happens, up to 80% of their brain development, and that has a big role on what happens to them as children, young people, and then as adults. And so the biggest reason for people to look at this sector is the huge difference they can make to children at the earliest stage. We've already seen over 102,000 parents claim this new offer, which is really strong demand, and it shows that this is something that people out there really want and that's going to make a huge difference to their family finances.
And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Martin.
Now we start with the tragic murder of Brianna Ghey. In the last hour, Eddie Ratcliffe and Scarlett Jenkinson have been sentenced. Jenkinson must serve a minimum of 22 years, while Ratcliffe, her accomplice, was given a minimum of 20 years. And let's cross now to Manchester Crown Court and speak to GB News reporter Sophie Reaper. Sophie, you were in court as Mrs Justice Yip served sentence. What was the reaction?
Well, there was really no kind of reaction from Jenkinson or Ratcliffe. Just the same as during the trial in December. They showed no emotion there, no remorse then, much to the chagrin of Brianna Ghey's family. And it was a similar story here today. They seemed to show no kind of physical reaction whatsoever when Justice Yip sentenced them. Throughout the sentencing process, we did see the odd fidget, the odd nervous twitch, but when she actually passed those sentences, 22 years minimum for Scarlett Jenkinson and 20 years minimum for Eddie Ratcliffe, neither of them really showed any kind of emotion whatsoever. Now, this murder was carried out almost a year to the day, 9 days, and it will be the 1-year anniversary of Brianna Ghey's murder, so it's really quite poignant that they have now been sentenced. Here's a little reminder of that tragic case. Teenage murderers. Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe, known until now as Girl X and Boy Y, have finally had their identities revealed to the public. In February of last year, the then 15-year-olds carefully planned and executed the brutal murder of transgender teenager Brianna Ghey. A piece of paper found in Scarlett's bedroom outlined the details of their plot to kill. The pair lured their victim to Linear Park in Warrington under the pretence of taking drugs. There, Brianna would be stabbed 28 times with a hunting knife belonging to Eddie. Her body was discovered by a couple who had simply gone to the park to walk their dog, but instead had to make the 999 call, which would later be used as part of the prosecution's case against Jenkinson and Ratcliffe.
You are under arrest on suspicion of murder. Obviously you are under caution, so anything you say is getting recorded. Okay?
If me being suspect is because I was the last person seen her, or how come suspect?
Pardon?
How come I'm a suspect?
How come you're a suspect?
Because I'm the last person that's seen her, is it?
You Eddie?
Yeah.
Eddie, you're locked up suspicion of murder, alright? You don't have to say anything, but you may harm you eventually when questioned. So you later line in court, and if you do say evidence, do you understand?
Yeah.
In their trial at Manchester Crown Court, the two teens turned against one another, each blaming the other for Brianna's death. But in the end, the jury found them both guilty of her murder. Sophie Reaper, GB News. Now, during that sentencing today, Justice Yip said she considered the murder carried out by Jenkinson and Ratcliffe to be of particularly high seriousness, and therefore, despite mitigations of mental health and their age, both being 15 at the time and 16 now, it was that led her to pass such high minimum term sentences. She said to Scarlett about the sadism that led her to carry out such a murder. She said, "Scarlett, you make up stories, you blur the lines between fantasy and real life." She added, "You knew Brianna was vulnerable and needed friendship, and you abused that." She then turned to Eddie Ratcliffe, who helped Scarlett plan out and carry out the murder of Brianna Ghey, as she spoke to him of his transphobia being what led him to partake in such a heinous crime. However, she did also discuss rehabilitation and how she hoped that they would both work hard at this. Of course, they're both still relatively young, meaning that respectively, if they were to get out at the minimum, they would be 36 and 38 years old. So she said she hoped there was a chance for them yet, that one day, if they were no longer a danger to society, that they could well be released.
And Sophie, are we expecting any comment from the parents? Recall before at the last hearing, astonishingly moving testimonies, particularly from the father and the mother. The father saying he just despaired how in Brianna's final moments he wasn't able to be there to protect her. No words that I think, certainly I found extremely moving. And the nature, the brutal detail of today, Mrs. Justice Yip setting out that Scarlett wanted to keep body parts and even suggested that she wanted to kill again.
Well, just to address your first question first about the parents of Brianna Ghey, they have, of course, throughout this entire process been very forthcoming with members of the press. They've given statements in court, they've given statements on the steps here behind me, but I think today it was perhaps all a little bit too much. We saw Brianna's father, Peter, leaving in one direction, and not long after, her mother, Esther, left in the opposite direction without giving any kind of comment. So I think perhaps now they just want to take stock of what they've heard today and just have a bit of private time with their families. In terms of what we've heard today in court, the really rather graphic details you mentioned there, hearing that Scarlett had perhaps wanted to take a body part of Brianna away with her. These details are incredibly disturbing. The Crown Prosecution Service acknowledged this after those sentences today, saying it was perhaps one of the most disturbing cases they've ever had to deal with. Of course, Scarlett, she had kill list, the murder plan that was found in her bedroom, notes on various different serial killers. We know that she had access to the dark web, and that she said that she was even excited and satisfied by carrying out the murder of Brianna.
Okay, so Reaper, thank you for that update from Manchester Crown Court. And joining me now to discuss this further is forensic psychiatrist Dr. David Holmes. Dr. Holmes, welcome to the show. An astonishing level of detail afforded this afternoon by Mrs. Justice Yip, giving a chilling insight, in particular, into the mindset of Scarlett Jenkinson. I wanted to try and get into that with you, if I could. She was clearly obsessed by serial killers, had detailed notes and records of people like Jeffrey Dahmer, how they killed, talk of Satanism, of use of the dark web, how she blurred the lines between fantasy and reality. My question to you, I guess, is rather simple, and that is, can people like Scarlett Jenkinson, is this nurture or is it nature? Are some people just evil?
I think in this case, you have someone who is by nurture, has certain traits. She's quite driven. I think she had some ADHD diagnosis and some autistic spectrum diagnosis, which is quite evident in the way that she approached all this. It's kind of like fairly insular. She doesn't integrate with other people very well. If she does so, often, like her compatriot Ratcliffe, it's by message. And I think some of this aspect was actually in court. So I was very surprised that the judge perhaps didn't actually deliver the verdict to them by message, because they'd have taken more notice of it, I think. In the case of Jenkinson, she is someone who has become extremely obsessed. I mean, normal person would become obsessed, but someone with the kind of autistic spectrum will become even more engrossed, obsessed, and driven by the subject matter that they're coming into. And obviously, this is unfortunately the worst subject matter that she could possibly have come across. Another autistic person possibly would have been train numbers or something incredibly benign, but again, approached with a very impersonal regard for the subject matter. She's fairly distant from others. She distanced herself and Ratcliffe from others. They bonded together in this, but even then, they mostly communicated by messages. So showing the kind of impersonal bond that they had. This is not an absolutely, starting from a normal perspective, someone who is totally evil. This is someone who has become engrossed in evil and now sees that as their kind of way of life, their reason for carrying on, their reason, their motivation for facing the rest of their life. I think this hasn't actually been pulled away from her, although I think Ratcliffe would be much more amenable to finding something else to be interested in and move away from the idea of killing or harming others entirely.
What was fascinating today, Dr. Holmes, was that when Mrs. Justice Yip was looking into those mitigating circumstances, the underlying conditions, she talked about Jenkinson suffering from a severe form of conduct social disorder. Also, she wasn't mature, she'd been self-harming, she previously suffered with anorexia, autism, and as you said, that's diagnosis for ADHD when she was younger, and yet she pushed that to one side in how she carried out her sentencing because she concluded that you wanted to do this, you wanted to kill and you wanted to do again. The diagnosis offered limited mitigation, and that, I think, will come as some comfort to the parents and to many people watching on.
Yes, I think in this case we have the kind of lifelong conditions that she had, which, you know, the average member of the public, you might think, well, isn't that mitigating? Isn't that sort of like, you know, making it too easy for them to do that and not know what they're doing? No, in this case, it's a bit like somebody being diagnosed as psychopathic. In fact, there are links between autism and psychopathy. In that, it's aggravating in court, not mitigating. It's aggravating. It makes them slightly more dangerous in that you have to overcome these levels of these disorders which allow a lack of empathy and allow a kind of lack of social insight into what they're doing. In other words, they don't see it in the context of other people and how other people see it. Only as they see it. So that has to be overcome. And that is a very long process because these are not disorders that go away. These are lifelong conditions.
OK, forensic psychiatrist Dr. David Holmes, thank you for joining us. Fascinating insight. And to recap, Mrs. Justice Yip said you both took part in a particularly brutal murder. You actively participated in this sadistic murder, she said to Eddie, plus motivated in part by transphobia. But to Scarlett, she said your primary motive was your deep desire to kill. Jenkins now serves 22 years minimum term and Ratcliffe a minimum term of 20 years. Now you get lots more on this horrendous story on our website. GBNews.com is the fastest growing national news website in the country. It's got breaking news and all of the brilliant analysis that you've come to expect from GB News. Now, on a completely different note, what would you do with an extra £1,500 each month for a whole year? Well, you could win that in our Great British Giveaway, as 18 grand in cold, hard cash is up for grabs. And here's how you can make that Wonga yours.
This is your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash. That's like having an extra £1,500 each month for the next year. And if you're thinking, I'd never win something like that, listen to the moment we told Phil from West Yorkshire he'd won our last Great British Giveaway.
Phil, I've got some really good news for you. You're the winner of the Great British Giveaway.
You're joking. That's brilliant news.
For your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Now, police say they've found significant and important evidence as they hunt for Abdul Azidi, the sex offender who's the suspect in the chemical attack case. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debate, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel. 2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:25. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Later this hour, I'll have news of another blow to the government's hopes of solving the migrant crisis. Yes, let another one. But first, let's get to the latest on the hunt for Abdul Azidi, the main suspect in the hunt for the man responsible for the chemical attack in London on Wednesday evening. Police say they found significant and important evidence during searches, and it emerged overnight that Azidi claimed he converted to Christianity when he was trying to claim asylum, and he said that his life would have been at risk if he'd been sent back to Afghanistan. Now, just how big a problem is this? OK, so now we're going to Gavin Ashendon to talk about this. Anglican bishop is converted to Catholicism in 2019. Dr. Gavin Ashendon. Dr. Ashendon, thank you for joining us on the show. Abdulazidi, there's a huge amount of talk now about the fact here's a man who was denied asylum twice, yet at the third attempt, after he converted to Christianity, as if by magic, he was granted the right to remain in the UK. And people are saying, is this something cynical? Is this a manipulation of the Christian faith in order to be able to stay in Britain?
Yes, it is. I was once a BBC presenter and I had my own radio show, and I remember interviewing, in fact, an Iranian woman who had become a Christian. And I was very struck by the way in which her experience was entirely genuine. But what has happened is it's become an industry and a way in. And the problem is that because there's no examination of the evidence properly, we're being lied to at so many levels. And the difficulty is that the public are treated as being entirely gullible. There is no evidence that this man actually lives and practices as a Christian. It was one of the ways in which to use the rules to gain asylum here, and he used it and misused it. I'm afraid that the Christian communities who were only too eager to accept his story were naive and gullible, and the government were equally. I'm not sure if the government are being naive and gullible, but they're certainly being determined to not follow up on the truth or the evidence. And the difficulty is that we're under a civilizational assault. The whole of our culture, the whole of our civilization is being threatened and abused by this. And it's time, at least that the public say, we are no longer going to be this gullible. We can't accept what's going on in our name.
And Dr. Ashendon, many people will be crying amen to that common sense, because there has been a pattern before, hasn't there? In November 2021, the Liverpool suicide bomber Ahmad al-Swilmeen, he also had converted to Christianity, and alarming information came out that people at clergymen, church workers who befriended him at Liverpool Cathedral, they knew that he wasn't really into this idea of being a bona fide Christian, as you might say, but they felt that it was something that they took sympathy with, this idea that they were giving him another chance. Do you think that's a fair thing to say, that actually a lot of the people who are involved in these miraculous conversions to Christianity, they know it's not genuine, but they believe that their higher calling is to afford somebody asylum?
It's very tempting to want to be as generous and as compassionate as we can. But the problem with compassion is it has to cut both ways. We have to have compassion for our own community. I mean, one of the reasons why I've been critical of the Archbishop of Canterbury in the House of Lords talking about compassion for asylum seekers is that I think his first duties for compassion are for his community here. We live in a society that's experiencing very serious tensions and indeed breakdown. The things that used to hold us together, to allow us to be good neighbours to one another, to understand who we were and what we were doing here, have been subsumed and drowned by a form of anarchic multiculturalism. It's not compassionate to our societies to let them be taken over by a variety of different communities with different standards. So there is no cohesion and even threatening the rule of law. So compassion has to begin at home, not because we're selfish, but because that's where, if you like, our most profound reality is experienced. There is no point in having fake compassion for people in order to virtue signal. We should call out virtue signaling for what it is and deal with our primary responsibilities for compassion, which are with our immediate neighbours, our immediate society. Our society is being destroyed, and it would not be compassionate to allow that to happen without asking serious questions.
And Dr. Ashendon, powerful words when you say our society is being destroyed from within. In this case, how does it make you feel to grasp the notion that Christianity, in a sense, is being used as a cover for people like Azidi?
Inevitably, it makes me very cross and very frustrated. I believe that the proper historical reading of our situation is that all the good things we experience in our extraordinary civilization, which is slowly being unwound, flow ultimately from the Christian faith and from a Christian understanding of the sacredness of the human person. Our whole industry of human rights flow from that. The idea that we should saw off the branch on which we're sitting is a piece of great stupidity and short-sightedness. What it requires us to do is to be able to distinguish between the authentic and the inauthentic, between truth and distortion. The problem is that our society is literally being overrun. And it means that our responsibility to provide education and health and social stability and political truth and policing are being frustrated. We can't, there is a contract in terms of the welfare state between what we produce as a society and what we give out. The overwhelming numbers that immigration propose break that contract, and we can't provide those things that we are responsible for to one another. It's a very, very serious crisis, and people are only beginning to wake up to the scale of it.
Dr. Gavin Ashendon, sobering, powerful, intellectual thoughts. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon on GB News. Thank you. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock. In a few minutes, I'll have news of dramatic new developments in the United States as battle to tackle the migrant crisis on the Texan border. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Martin. It's 5:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The two teenagers who killed Brianna Ghey in what the judge described as a sadistic and brutal stabbing have both been jailed for her murder. 16-year-old Scarlett Jenkinson will serve a minimum term of 22 years. Eddie Radcliffe, also 16, was given a minimum of 20 years. In victim statements read to the court, Brianna's family described them as two predators stalking their prey and said they are pure evil. A manhunt continues for suspected chemical attacker and refugee Abdul Yazidi. As it's emerged, officers have found significant and important new evidence. The Metropolitan Police has released a new image of the suspect last seen at King's Cross Underground Station on Wednesday evening. Police say the 31-year-old mother who was attacked is still sedated in hospital with life-changing injuries. It comes after Rishi Sunak says foreign criminals should not be allowed to stay in the UK following the manhunt. A student who ran over and killed her fiancé after she lost her temper following an argument between them has been sentenced to life in prison. Alice Wood will serve a minimum term of 18 years for the murder of Ryan Watson. The 24-year-old was found guilty of killing Ryan, also 24, following a trial at Chester Crown Court last month. He was hit by the Ford Fiesta Alice was driving near their home in Cheshire, which she had claimed was a tragic accident. In other news, a man has died falling from the Tate Modern near the River Thames in London. Police, air ambulance and paramedics attended the scene, but despite the efforts, the man died at the scene. The gallery, which is one of the most visited art museums in the world, will remain closed following the incident. The death is currently being treated as unexpected, but it is not thought to be suspicious. There are fresh warnings of potential human rights breaches on the BB Stockholm barge as asylum seekers face what's being described as claustrophobic conditions. The Home Affairs Select Committee says cramped living conditions are contributing to a decline in mental health for some residents. It follows confirmation from the Home Office that the cost of housing migrants on the barge is £120. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Well, it's my favourite part of the show now. It's Friday, and joining me is Michelle Dewberry. Of course, straight after this 6 till 7, it's Michelle Dewberry on Jubes and Go. Now, Jubes, can't lie to you, it's been a bit of a demanding show today. The Brianna Ghey murder, the Abdul Yazidi manhunt. It's quite a moment that makes you think a lot about the world and what's going within it. And I'm sure, Michelle, you'll be doing your very best to try and make sense of that on your show this evening.
Well, it is. I mean, trust me, right? Trust me, dear
dear viewers, I hunt high and I hunt low for positive, uplifting stories. I have to say, though, that today, as Martin just said, the news agenda is very much dominated by those horrendous stories that he's just been referencing there. Children, you know, are they born evil? How can it be that teenagers can do such heinous acts, and when they do, that is my question. Are they born that way? Are they nurtured into being that way? And the judge in that sentencing as well was talking about potential, potential rehabilitation. Can you really rehabilitate someone who does things like that? So I want to explore all of that. Also, as well, I thought it was interesting, Brianna's dad said that those teenagers shouldn't have been named because it gives them some form of glory almost. What do we think to that? And of course, as you just mentioned as well, Martin, the manhunt continues. You know, I still keep reflecting on the fact, you know, why was there such a delay in releasing a description of this fella, his images, etc., so that people could actually proactively have been trying to track him down? But of course, like you, we're also asking, how on earth was he even allowed in this country? If I've got time as well, I want to talk about bankers' bonuses. Right not to reintroduce them. And a strange but nonetheless interesting one is letting kids in school play rugby a form of child abuse. That's a suggestion today.
Well, as usual, Michelle Dewberry, a varied and exciting menu. I hope you do try and help the nation make sense of some of this, because I think a lot of us sometimes just wonder, you know, what's going on in the world.
I know.
This Brianna murder and this acid attack, Michelle, sometimes it kind of makes you despair. But anyhow,
well,
I know you'll do your very
Lord
best.
Moylan and Paul Embry, and what better minds to help make sense of it all than that.
Thank you very much. It's going to be superb. Jubes & Co, 6 till 7. Thank you very much. Now to the latest in the migrant crisis in the United States. And the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, has put himself on a collision course head-on with President Joe Biden, because it's thought that more than 300,000 Mexicans crossed the US border in December alone. And the vast majority of them enter Texas over that Mexican border. And now DeSantis has announced that he's sending 1,000 National Guard troops from his own state, Florida, to Texas in order to help protect that border. And I can now speak with US political analyst Eric Ham. Eric, thank you for joining us on the show. It's always a pleasure. He is coming up. Here's Eric Ham. Eric, thanks for coming on the show. An astonishing story. Ron DeSantis, of course, recently dropped out of the presidential primary race against Donald Trump, but he's soon found fresh purpose, deploying National Guard from Florida to Texas on a direct collision course with President Biden.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, he's not the only governor. In fact, we know that there are at least 12 other Republican governors that have proposed support to Governor Abbott in this ongoing battle with the federal government over this immigration fight. Now, we know that next week, the U.S. Senate is actually expected to bring comprehensive immigration reform to the floor. And this is going to be a battle that's taking place here in Washington, just as much as it's taking place right there on the U.S. southern border. And already we're seeing not only is the governor of Texas in defiance of a Supreme Court order that actually allows for federal troops to actually engage on the southern border. But what we're seeing here is this is becoming a major crisis that's now pitting the U.S. government against a number of key states along the United States.
And Eric, astonishing, he's basically sending the National Guard from his own state to Texas to help them put up barriers, to help them put up barbed wire. And this is all stuff that Joe Biden has ordered to be removed. Can I ask you, as a Brit, how big an issue will immigration and border control be in the forthcoming presidential election, which, of course, is this November?
Well, first of all, we have to remember the U.S. Supreme Court has already announced that the barbed wire that the governor is putting up, that was supposed to come down. So what we're seeing here is the governor is actually defying an order. So he's actually doing something against the law. But this is going to be a priority for this ongoing fight. In fact, we know right now that Donald Trump is actually against this comprehensive legislation that is expected to pass the Senate and go before the House. And quite frankly, this is legislation that Republicans have been calling for decades now. In fact, what we see is that not only is Biden in a battle with Republican governors, but he's in a battle with his own party, because many progressives don't want to see this legislation passed because it gives Republicans everything that they have ever asked for. And so this is clearly going to be, I think, a massive issue on the campaign trail. The question is it going to be a double-edged sword where it will harm Republicans just as much as it harms Democrats, because it looks as though Republicans are not going to act on what they have actually run on.
And Eric, words from Ron DeSantis last night that will echo this side of the pond with Brexiteers. He said this: if we don't have a border, then we are not a sovereign country. You either have a border or you don't. You're either a sovereign country or you are not. How politically motivating will that be for the Republican base when this election comes?
Well, clearly, Biden is trying to take this issue off the table by getting this legislation passed. It remains to be seen if that will happen. But we know that the border issue has vexed the Biden administration since they actually came into office. And now we see that, in fact, the Homeland Security Secretary is actually in the process of being impeached, at least by the House, because they believe that there has been inaction by him on this issue.
OK, Eric Ham, thanks for joining us. The very definition of a Mexican standoff down there on the border ahead of the greatest show on earth, the US presidential election in November. Eric, I'm sure you'll be joining us many more times to comment on that. Thank you very much for joining us this side of the pond. Now, if you're going out for a drink tonight, which I am, then you might want to check what you're being charged, because some bars are adding 2% to bills without the punters even knowing about it. Daylight robbery as you get the beers in. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's News Channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. 5:46. Now to news of yet another blow to the government's hopes of solving the never-ending migrant crisis. It looks like hopes of a returns deal with Turkey are dead in the water after the Home Office said it's not a safe country due to human rights concerns. Well, joining me now to discuss this is journalist Melda Doan, who is based in Istanbul. Melda, welcome to the show. With the People's Channel, I've got an email here from Dave. I'd like to read it out to you. Dave says this: how can Turkey be unsafe? Millions of Brits go there on their holidays every year.
Well, that's a true point. It's safe for Brits coming on holidays. It's safe for most of the Turkish people who are living in central Anatolia, who voted for Erdogan's party, who are supporting his policies. It's safe if you are not interested in politics, if you are not engaged, an engaged citizen who is vocal, who wants to post on social media, who wants to go out and protest and take an anti-government stance or be a part of the opposition. It's safe, of course. But for many people who are journalists, for example, or for politicians of the opposition parties, or just normal citizens who want to take on social media to express anger and disappointment and criticize the government, they of course risk a high level of going through a judiciary process, because the laws have been changed in the recent years. We have now a disinformation law, which is very strict on people who are criticizing the government. You risk really going through a judiciary process for going on social media. You really risk being detained for protesting, of course, for the wrong reasons. I mean, if you are doing a protest on any of the topics that the government is supporting, you're not risking anything. But the point here is, on which camp are you in the country? If you are a part of the opposition, it is really, it might be risky in that sense.
OK, Melda, well, the previous Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, isn't convinced by that debate. She said the government should rethink this situation. As Home Secretary, I worked at proposals to list Turkey as a safe country. And the point is this, Melda, that 3,000 Turks arrived illegally into Britain last year, 162% increase. And doesn't this, if I get sent home to my home country, I'll be persecuted clause, just simply allow people to avoid deportation, and it could be used illicitly and with scurrilous means?
Well, those people, most of those people, as I said previously, most of them are people who are opponents of the current government. They might be, for example, some people from the FETA organization. They say so-called FETA organization, but that doesn't really mean all of those people who are prosecuted. In that sense, are really a member of the group, or are really supporting the FETA group, because the process at this point hasn't been really transparent regarding the case, the judiciary cases of FETA members. And as I said before, of people who mostly come to the UK is actually the educated people of Turkey. When you look at the numbers, when you look at the figures and the people, you will see that the educated minds are going to the UK or either to the US when they choose to migrate from Turkey. And most of the time, the reason is that because they are against the current government, which doesn't necessarily mean that you will go in jail particularly, but they might block you in a way from making business, closing on deals, or doing business in a way so that these people are really in that sense blocked from many ways in their social life and economic life. So that's why they opt to migrate. Believe me, if they would have an option to leave freely, better life, they would stay in their country.
Can I get a point in here? People's ability to have a nice economic life, to lead, that of course is fine. But a lot of people watching this will be saying, well, why is it Britain's responsibility to take care of that? And surely we've seen many times from people arrivals from other nations, they know how to game the system. They know what to say to the asylum seeker officers in Britain. They know how to play the game. And if I were a Turk coming over, I'd just be saying, well, if I go back, I'll get political persecution. Ka-ching, you can stay. It leaves the route open to abuse, does it not?
Well, why is it Turkey's responsibility to take 3.5 million Syrians to Turkey? Or why is it any other country's responsibility to take migrants? So you're leading to a total big question, and I think that this discussion will take forever if we take it to that point.
All right, well, in that case, why don't we call it a day there? Thank you very much, journalist Melda Doan, for joining us on the show live from Istanbul. Now, moving swiftly onwards for a swift drink, perhaps, because Brits are being hit with unexpected charges or tips, American style. A string of pubs in Scotland have started to automatically add a shocking 2% hidden service charge to all the bevies they serve up. And this follows another pub chain introducing dynamic pricing, as they call it, and diners complaining about feeling ambushed with charity donations included on restaurant bills without even being told. Well, joining me now is the CEO of the Nighttime Industries Association, Michael Kill, the legend who spoke out about lockdowns from the very beginning. Michael, people don't like these hidden extras, especially on their booze.
Without a doubt, and I can understand that, and I think our industry has got to get into a process of being quite overt with it and letting people know exactly where the tips are coming from, what they're being used for, and who they're going to. I mean, it's a challenge that we faced as we went through a lot of the consultation on the tipping legislation, which is due to come in this year. So I think it's really important that we're very clear and very transparent with how those tips are used, and that they're going to stuff, which I think is the important part.
And again, people don't mind, 10% on their food if it's voluntary, but the fact of the matter is this is just being put on there without people knowing. That's what's getting people's goat.
From what I understand, it's discretionary. The challenge that we have, I think, in some of the cases you've described, is people are unaware of it. And I think that needs to be clear in terms of training the staff and letting them know that they need to tell the customer that there is a discretionary charge on there for service. I think the big thing that we have to understand in the industry is in a very difficult position, and retaining staff is very hard. Many of those are on wage. So for us, there is a lot of work that we put into retaining them. The business can pay up to a certain point, and then there is a discretionary opportunity which a lot of these staff rely on to bolster their wage bracket.
OK, thank you very much. I'll have to call time on this interview. Michael Kill, the CEO of the Nighttime Industries Association, a man who I greatly admire. Super. Thank you very much. OK, I'm calling it time for myself on the show. Thank you for joining us this week. I'll be here 3 till 6. I'll be back next week. It's been a tremendous week. I'm off for a drink myself. After this is Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co, picking over all the biggest issues of the week. Have a great Friday evening.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. A bright and blustery day on Saturday across the north, a mild day in the south, and in between there will be some thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain, courtesy of this weather front, which is slicing between high pressure to the south and low pressure to the north, bringing thicker cloud and a bit of rain as it trickles south through Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, northern England overnight. Still very gusty at the moment over northeast England and southeast Scotland. The winds will steadily ease, but staying very windy in the far north with more showers here. In the far south, it stays very mild, with temperatures remaining in double digits. In fact, most of England and Wales will hold up at 9 or 10 Celsius. A little colder further north, but still very blustery here on Saturday. More showers to come across the Highlands and the Western Isles, but some sunshine for southern and eastern Scotland, much of Northern Ireland, and much of northern England as well. Quite dull and damp in West Wales, and during the day, some of that rain may spread back up across parts of northern England into East Anglia. Much of the south, though, just dry, but fairly drab. Mild, however, temperatures getting into the teens, colder feel further north. Sunday sees some patchy rain spreading from Wales to Northern Ireland and turning damp in western parts of Scotland, but probably not much rain getting to the east coast. Again, much of the south just dry and cloudy. It will be quite windy throughout the weekend, but it's going to stay mild with temperatures again in the teens.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.